Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission special meeting for May 20th, 2013. Can we start with roll call, please?
Commissioner Jemian?
Present.
President Armenian?
Present.
Commissioner Dentler?
Present.
Commissioner Yao?
Present.
Commissioner Chan?
Present.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I just wanted to, I hope all our prayers are with our fellow citizens in Oklahoma who have suffered a great loss today with the tornado that hit, and it's still unknown the number of losses, but at least 51 of our fellow citizens have perished as a result of that tornado, and they expect the count to go up as well. So I just wanted to just give a moment to share our thoughts and prayers with those who are suffering today. We'll start with consent items, approval of the April 1, 2013 meeting minutes. Any changes or input? Okay, if none, then we'll consider those approved. Next agenda item.
3A, GWP Commission Policy for Agendizing Commission Business.
Mr. President and members of the Commission, I'm Christine Godina, Senior Assistant City Attorney. And at the last Commission meeting, there was a question raised about what the policy is for placing items on your agendas. And I provided you in your packets, and is available online, a copy of the policy that this Commission adopted back in 2010, as well as the policy of the City Council. Both the policy adopted by this Commission and the one that the City Council adopted in 2008 require 2 members of the governing body to agree to place an item on the agenda. That is not to say that the rules under the Brown Act don't apply, which means that the President can call a special meeting, or any 2 members of this Commission could call a special meeting, just as would be the same for the City Council. I went back and I wanted to refresh my memory, so I reviewed what we discussed back in 2010. And we also talked about the Burbank policy, which I would propose as an alternative or an option that is out there, and that is what's called a one-step, two-step process. It's slightly more cumbersome. And what happens there is that there's initially a discussion by the governing body about whether to place something on the agenda. If there's not a majority that wants to have it on the agenda, staff brings it back for an initial discussion just about whether the item should be placed on the agenda at a subsequent meeting. And if the body then decides to have that meeting on the agenda, it's placed on the agenda at a subsequent meeting. And back in 2010, when the GWP Commission considered it, it was decided that that was too cumbersome and would delay getting business before you. But I have prepared a motion which has a blank for your input as to what you'd like to have. You could continue your current practice. You could propose something different. It's entirely up to you.
Mr. President.
Okay.
Some questions, some comments. I recall that during this discussion in 2010 that we were trying to be consistent with the City Council in having at least some interest before any one council member or commissioner would place an agenda item on the future agenda for discussion. So we want to be consistent with the City Council, but as you know, this body meets once a month and the City Council meets more often. And so my recollection was that maybe it doesn't show the exception in this document, but we were understanding, at least my recollection was that we want to be consistent, but the president of the commission, of this commission, has that, I guess, authority maybe to make off-meeting suggestions to have items placed on the agenda rather than having another fellow commissioner second it before it goes to a formal agenda. And so I know that maybe non-officer commissioners can propose something and then has to be second for it to be agendized. But I think the president of the commission always had the authority to act upon placing an agenda with discussion with staff for a future meeting because we don't meet that often. And so that was my understanding. If it's not in this document, I would like to propose that that be the case so that our president of this commission has the authority to do it.
Okay, so that's not currently in your policy, although, as I said, the president could call a special meeting. So in that regard, he could call a special meeting.
Not a special meeting,
topic,
agendizing an item.
But yeah, so for a regular meeting, you'd have to amend your policy to do that, and that certainly is something that this commission could agree to do.
And that's the draft motion that you have in the packet?
Right, with a blank, so just, tell me how you want it to read, and we'll prepare that policy and present it to you for approval.
Oh, I see. And then, so the approval would be at the, potentially at the next meeting?
Or a subsequent meeting.
Okay.
Because,
Before,
I'm sorry, is that because because the Brown Act applies even to our enactment of our own procedural policies?
Yes, I mean, you can't agree, you need to be in an open session to agree on a policy. I guess I could have prepared a policy for you, but not knowing what you wanted, I couldn't have done that for today.
so before we go to any proposed ideas, is there any other input?
I agree with Commissioner Yao. I think it's cumbersome to have to wait, a month. Sometimes we don't actually end up meeting monthly if you time it by exact 4-week increments. So when matters of some urgency come up, and I think our commission does deal with such a key function of city government, the provision of water and power to the city, to the residents and business community, that I think we should have some flexibility for the president to place things on the agenda, because it doesn't dictate that there will be a motion enacted, but that we have the confidence that somebody that we have elected to be our procedural leader has the discretion to put things onto an agenda, and I would favor that.
Okay, so do one of you want to make this?
Oh, no, I just
motion,
have some
or just the
additional
one?
input
Okay.
regarding Commissioner Detler's comments, was that it's not an outright authority by the President's Commission to make a one-sided agenda item, but to consult with staff and all that, maybe do some planning and just having the item for discussion, not necessarily a conclusion of any type of agenda item, because within a month before we next meet, there could be some urgent issues that may come up that we want to just have to have a discussion or explore some ideas before we take any action on them. So from that perspective, I would prefer the President of the Commission to consult with staff, and before, when the agenda is supposed to be posted, that he or she can place an item for discussion. So that's where we want to go with that. It's just that authority to discuss with staff, to agendize an item outside of commission meeting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm okay with that.
So do one of you want to take this draft motion and?
So I'm kind of scribbling a motion here. It would read that the GWP Commission directs the City Attorney to prepare a revised policy for the GWP Commission regarding the placement of matters on the GWP agenda as follows. That the policy would permit the President, in consultation with staff, to place an item on the agenda without the need to have a second by a second commissioner. I can probably work this wording a little bit more nicely. Would you then want to still retain the rule that requires 2 non-president commissioners to agree and take it up during agenda forecast, or do you want to do away with that?
Meaning
as well?
for other types of agenda?
Any other matter, yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's,
think it would be wise to be consistent, because having the President being elected among us has the authority, whereas the other commissioners will need a second. Would that be a second by a fellow commissioner or a second by the President himself or herself?
As it is now, it can be any 2 commissioners. That kind of gives you a little more flexibility, I would think, but it's up to you how you want to do that.
Any 2 commissioners is fine.
Right.
and
Yep.
do you need to be more clear that the issue of the president singularly setting an agenda item can be done outside of a regular commission meeting? I don't know if you want to be more clear about that.
That's a good suggestion.
Outside and during
Yeah.
the meeting. Mhm.
Okay, so it would say that to prepare a policy that permits the President, in consultation with staff, to place an item on the GWP Commission agenda, either outside of or during a commission meeting, without the need to have a second commissioner agree to hear the item, but to retain the requirement that 2 commissioners, well, okay,
President?
that if a commissioner other than the President wants to have an item on the agenda, then a second commissioner, which could include the President, must also agree to have that item on the agenda.
The way it reads now is, looking at the final page of our procedure, these don't seem to be paginated, but in our packet, it's the last page of the document called GWP Commission Policy Ray Agenda Setting, dated 4/29/10. So right now we have it reading in subsection capital B. The terminology is if two commissioners express their interest in placing a matter on the agenda. And I think that's generally how our commissions work, that we just have a kind of an informal expression of interest. And I think that language provides some flexibility, so we don't need to have something like a formal second. I would think that expression of interest would be enough.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you. I'll incorporate that.
Okay, so do we want to make that a formal motion directing staff to come back with a formal motion?
Right. So if someone wants to so move, do you want me to try and read it again?
Yes.
Okay. To prepare a policy that permits the president, in consultation with staff, to place an item on the GWP Commission agenda, either outside of or during a commission meeting, without the need to have a second commissioner express interest in hearing the item, but to retain the requirement that if a member of the commission other than the commission president is interested in hearing an item, that another commissioner, which may include the president, must also express an interest in having that item heard in order for it to be placed on the agenda.
Okay, sounds. So want to
Sounds
move.
long.
Sounds long, but you can phrase it.
Maybe separate those into two separate.
We authorize you to make it more succinct.
I'm going to, thank
Right.
you. This is just directing me to
Right,
go
right.
back and make a policy. The policy, I hope, is going to read a little bit more clearly
Right.
than that.
Yeah.
And we'll have another opportunity to review it at the next meeting.
That's right.
Right, right. Okay, so I move to that motion to have the agenda items be considered for the next meeting.
Okay, second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Next agenda item.
3B, coal policy recommendation to City Council.
So we have several speakers on this item as well. Ms. Codina's, do we take those after we talk about it or prior?
Before you make a decision on these motions, you should have your speakers.
Okay, so let's first get the motion out there,
So review
and
that.
then we'll talk about it, and then we'll have opportunity for the public to speak to those agenda items, that agenda item.
So, Mr. President and members of the commission, we do have 3 motions that have been prepared, and these are based on the motions that Commissioner Dentler had proposed at the last meeting. And so we've written those up, and we present those to you for your consideration and discussion.
So the first one is the integrated resource plan. It's in a packet with all 3 motions together.
Can you give us a moment so we can all get it in front of us? Let's see.
It's stapled together. There's like 3 pages stapled together separately.
Oh, thank you.
It says motion at the top.
3B1.
Yep.
I'm there.
Thanks, I have it. Do we have another staff report on these motions, or no? No. Okay, thank you.
These, Ms. Dentler, were based on your
Oh, I
input to the city attorney's office.
I remember, based on the public's input to us, yes. And also to, maybe I'll just add 10 more seconds of background.
Yeah, I think we should,
If I
I
may.
think just to refresh our memory, because it has been almost 2 months, if we, each one will, maybe if you can give a refresher, since these are your motions, you can kind of do a non-legal sounding explanation of what the motion's intent is.
So collectively, all 3 motions have the same general intent, which is to, number 1, to encourage discussion and debate here as a commission, clarify our thinking and have an opportunity for us as commissioners to have a dialogue about how and when to propose, to recommend to City Council steps that can be taken to reduce reliance on coal as a source of energy. And so all three together are in furtherance of that general objective, which staff had reported to us 2 meetings ago and also on previous occasions, was the objective of the staff and an important objective of the utility. And one of my concerns, which underlay the making of these motions, was that staff's laudable expression of general intention to move our utility off of reliance on coal was not actually embodied anywhere in our written plan, so that members of the public can't actually turn to a written document and see that that is the roadmap that staff is taking us down. So that is really the goal of all three motions, that we could first debate, discuss, informed by the public that came before us, and also I know all of us have done our homework and have our own perspectives on this important issue. And since my motions were made, I just wanted to refer to a couple of things. Since we were last here hearing so much input from the public, concern about reliance on coal, this has been quite a bit in the news, and I'm sure that my fellow commissioners have seen the news items as I have. This is really part of a national debate. The United States is heavily reliant on coal as a source of power, and varies from region to region, but generally speaking, we have about 40% reliance on coal in the United States. Now, here in Glendale, we're below that, and that's a good thing. Different cities and utilities within our region have different numbers on that, but I think Glendale has a starting place that's below the national standards. That's a good thing, but we need to keep going, get that down as far as we can as we try to reach our state-mandated goals for reliance on renewables. And
just
also,
to clarify, there is no coal-fired generation within the state of California.
correct.
But there is power that's imported into California from coal-generated assets outside of the state, most notably neighboring states.
Right. So that's my general, just in the way of general background, and my hope is that we can have a healthy debate, perhaps hear some more from the public, but I think we heard a lot from the public last time, and I'm sure we've all done our homework. And then my hope is that we can signal to City Council that it's time to actually place these goals and timetables into our written plan. And with that, I would like to just mention that I brought the existing annual report and some of our documents that members of the public could reasonably turn to in researching what Glendale's strategic plan is. And so I'll just hold this one up for the camera. This is the one that was given to me when I joined the commission. I'm the newest member, so my documents are the newest, I believe. And in the GWP strategic plan for 2009 through 2014, I was interested to see that the word coal doesn't appear. And then when you turn to the annual reports for 2009, 2010, the word coal doesn't appear either. And I think that as with our new leadership in place, and as the next strategic planning process unfolds, that I would like to have strategic planning documents accurately inform the community what our sources of energy are, so that members of the public who are concerned about coal and its contribution to climate change will be able to actually find information, accurate information, because the public are chief stakeholders in that. So those would be my comments, and then I'll wait and hear what the other commissioners think about the motions.
So just procedurally, in terms of how I'd like to approach this is have a discussion about each motion, but not vote on it. Listen to the members of the public, and then we'll come back and vote on them individually.
Yeah, we call that when we decide on these motions, put on the agenda last meeting, that we didn't get a chance to make any suggestions or to have a discussion or any debate on it. So I agree that we have to set some kind of goals for the city and maybe a schedule as well, but I'm not sure if isolating or identifying coal as the source for our environmental concern is the way to go, because I like to have the city and over GWP utility have a clean energy policy rather than just isolating coal to eliminate coal. And so I know coal right now is the dirtiest power generation that we have, but potentially in the future there could be additional research and development that could capture those carbon and inject it in the ground. I know there's some research is being done, but it could be a few years from now or longer. But we don't want to have an exclusionary power source that potentially could be very environmentally friendly as well as very cost effective. And so that was what I would propose back then if we had some discussion or debate about it. But I would suggest making such type of amendments so that we can identify that potentially this is the goal to eliminate coal, but if coal is a source of cheap alternative as well as environmental and clean alternative, then it should be considered.
Other comments? So I assume that your comments have to do with all three motions.
Yes.
Yep.
I will wait until the speakers
Okay.
then respond.
All right. Any other comments on any of? So I guess that's your comments were in general. If there are no other general comments, are there specific comments to the first one, which is an integrated resource plan? I have a question to staff. Does GWP management have, because it's asking for basically the creation of a plan, how does this, in your view, Mr. Zern, fit into the current planning processes that you have regarding resources to meet the needs?
We do not have a budget or have this included in our budget. This is a rather expensive endeavor. If you use other examples, I think I've heard $600,000-$700,000 to do something like this, so that's not something we have budgeted. Now, of course, that's looking at the kind of IRP that other agencies have done. We may not need to do something that extensive for us, because as Mr. Yao indicated, it'd be good if we had a renewable a plan or a document that shows our plan for renewable energy, which we do, essentially. But if we did add something that included coal, fossil fuel in general, if that was something...
Well, I guess let me, sorry to interrupt you, but let me kind of take a step back and ask a question. Today's, and either you or Mr. Lenz can maybe answer this, as part of the, I assume, some sort of regular planning process, the utility looks at its overall portfolio of where it's acquiring, what types of fuel-based generation it's acquiring, right, to kind of complete the pie, if you will. And coal is one of those slices of the pie today.
Correct.
What is the normal process that you go through to make those decisions?
Well, keep in mind, with regards to coal, we're contractually obligated. That isn't something that we're out on the market buying on a daily basis where we could just decide from today forward we won't buy any more coal.
Yeah.
We own these coal.
That's kind of why I'm asking. What's the normal process?
So
for coal
as
today?
Mr. Linz had shown you, there is a process for us to essentially wean ourselves off of these projects. In particular cases, San Juan, it might end up happening a lot sooner than the original terminus of the contract. For IPP, as again Mr. Linz indicated, we're sort of running alongside LA. They are the big holders of the IPP. They have a definite goal to get off and have that plant repowered in something other than coal, more than likely natural gas. So we would be following them on that, and when the terminus of that agreement comes up. But other than that, we aren't purchasing coal energy outside of those contracts that we have.
Outside of the current contracts right now.
Most of our energy purchases, are contract based.
Right. And so I guess I come back to my original question, which is you have some sort of current process by which you determine, what the future purchases are going to look like, what future contracts might look like, what the sources are, et cetera. So this motion would call for, it's formally calling it an integrated resource plan, right? How does that sync up with GWP's current planning in this category?
And I could maybe help by holding up the strategic plan.
Well, that strategic plan is, Ms. Dentler, is dated and isn't something that we are no longer using that. We're going to be developing a new strategic plan for the department. We're in the process of doing that now. But I think the short answer to that is that we, as part of these motions, we will develop a more defined plan, and probably something we'll need to do when we go to council with this, because this won't be enough background information for council, obviously, is to show them the contractual obligations we have and what our goals are to get ourselves off of those, to get out of those contracts and get ourselves away from coal, because that's where our coal interests are at this point in time. And then we'll sync that up with our renewable plan for meeting the state mandate as well.
Yeah.
So somehow we can put those two together. It may not be, what I'm getting at is it may not be this comprehensive IRP plan that we'd go out and hire a consultant to come through and start from scratch.
That's why I'm asking these questions, because I think it's a kind of a combination of where Commissioner Dentler wants to go with this, and also looking at what Commissioner Yao is suggesting, which is looking at the bigger picture that includes coal, but not just focused on coal. I'm trying to figure out in my mind, as I think this through, how a integrated resource plan fits into current processes, or are we talking about a brand new process that we're suggesting that City Council adopt, and what are the impacts of those new processes?
And it could be either or, and we'll have to talk about what the impacts to those are. As I said, I think starting from scratch and doing a whole new IRP may not be in our best interest, but I think we can easily get to the point that you want to see by developing our strategy for getting ourselves off the contracts that we're currently on, combined with our renewable portfolio. But I think the interest, it's consistent with what the intent of these motions are. And,
is there going to be a document called the GWP strategic plan for after this one ends in 2014?
I'm not sure, Ms. Dentler.
Okay.
It's something that I'm revisiting. There's a lot of effort that's put into plans like that, and at the end of the day, it's no longer valid for us in the new direction that we're going. So I hesitate to go out and put too much time, effort, and money into something that won't be valuable for us.
I agree. I agree. I just wondered, I wasn't here when this one was made, so I don't know if this one was made in conjunction with whoever the commissioners were at the time.
I think the commissioners had some input. Steve may know more about that, but I don't think that some of the things that we're talking about were as thoroughly discussed.
Sure, understandably, times change, and in the world of climate change, things have heated up since this document. But I do think that it's helpful to the public to have a document, and it may not be appropriate to have one span this number of years, since we're in such a, things speed up. So, but I do think that the public and the commission and the city council should have a written roadmap, and the roadmap should show sources of energy and goals for reducing reliance on sources of energy that are the most concerning from the environmental standpoint. So we either do without a strategic plan. I mean, there's only a few options. You don't have one, or you kind of have one, but the public can't find it because it changes so fast that it's never written down.
Again, makes it almost worthless.
Yeah. And then they're the kind that are sort of hybrids that are being continually revised and updated, but at least that the commission and the council have regular opportunities for the public to sort of meet and confer, and then it's a flexible document.
I think what I found last year when we were going out and doing our community outreach was there was a lot of interest and a lot of individuals who had no idea where we get our power from. Purchase power, for instance. People were really amazed how much money we spend buying power.
Yes.
And importing it from outside, and what a big chunk of our budget that is. And during those presentations, we had a lot of really nice graphs and pie charts that really laid it out very succinctly. And I think that if we were to produce something, not a strategic plan, and I hesitate to even call it that, but something that shows our goals and objectives for the next 3 years, let's say, along with where we get our energy from and all of these kind of facts that show where we're going with our contracts, the repowering of Grayson, for instance, and some of these long-range goals that actually aren't so much long-range. They're very short-term, 3 to 5 and probably closer to 3 in most cases. A whole discussion on our renewables, which was something else that a lot of people didn't know a lot about, and how much money that costs us and how much more that costs us than traditional sources of energy. So if we were able to put a document together that's not so much a strategic plan, but more an information guide that shows and lays out for folks where we're going in the next 2 to 3 years, along with some of these facts that I think enlighten people tremendously into what the utility does and how we produce and what we rely on for energy sources.
So here's a thought for my fellow commissioners to consider. When you look at the second motion, which is essentially to get us off current contracts within a certain time frame, and then you've got the third motion, which essentially says that we're not going to sign any new contracts having to do with coal. You're essentially addressing the coal-specific issue with those two motions. The integrated resource plan sounds like something that, as Commissioner Yao was mentioning, would kind of set a higher level, more comprehensive plan in place that looks at all the clean energy issues, not just ones having specifically to deal with coal. It would seem to me that if you put that sort of larger resource plan in place, gives GWP, the staff, the flexibility to develop a 360-degree view of the generation issue. Motion 2 and 3 address the coal-specific objectives that were introduced here by Commissioner Dentler, which is get us off the current contracts, don't sign any new contracts. And so you address coal that way. What are any reactions to that approach? Because right now, the way the integrated resource plan motion reads, it brings it back to that establishes specific goals and timetables for the elimination of the municipal utilities' reliance on coal-fired generation, which really, motion 2 is already setting that time frame. It's saying it has specific dates attached to the termination of agreements, and then the third motion is saying don't sign any new contracts.
You know, based on my recollection of that meeting, I believe these 3 motions address what the public speakers requested and also what Commissioner Dentler requested. I'm perfectly fine with the way these motions are worded at this time, and I think it would be good for us to listen to the speakers.
Of course.
That's my comments. Yeah.
And let me just mention one thing. It's not that we would never do an integrated resource plan, but thinking more along the lines of the very short term, it's not something you're going to see us do within the next 12 months, for instance. I think we can get there in other ways that really address coal in its current iteration is the way I like to look at that. So future issues with coal that may come up and embedded in the plan is the ability for us to reach out to different technologies. But the way I looked at this, and I think this is the way I interpreted Ms. Dentler's intent, was coal in its current iteration, coal-fired generation facilities. And the use of those to produce electricity. That's how I looked at it. Not really eliminating any future use of coal if it turns out to be clean.
Well, but the way third motion reads is it would eliminate anything coal. It doesn't really leave that room for interpretation.
Those are
but
just my thoughts.
So let's do this. Let's hear from the public, and then we can come back to the discussion.
If I can just reemphasize one thing that Mr. Zern pointed out, which I think is a point well taken. Notice that motion number 1 does not set the City Council on any timeline, time-driven deadline for developing an integrated resource plan. But other, large municipal utilities have integrated resource plans, and should the City Council, in its wisdom and when it finds the money to do so, this just indicates that our commission thinks that it would be a healthy step for our utility to have an integrated resource plan. It doesn't state any time deadline for doing so, nor does it require an expenditure or a place in the budget. So I still favor the adoption of this motion, but I also would like to hear from the public. And this is one reason I asked if there was a staff report. I understand that there isn't, and that's fine. But I was wondering whether development and adoption of an integrated resource plan, I think, is an expense item, and I assume that staff might have concerns about that and the impact on our city budget. That's something that can be, await another day, and that wouldn't the passage of this motion wouldn't necessitate any immediate expenditures. So with that in mind, I'd like to hear from
Point of clarification. Isn't the integrated resource plan required by the CEC or the city to be developed?
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Steve Lenz, Chief Assistant General Manager. We actually have an adopted integrated resource plan. It's required by WAPA, which is one of the control areas that we bring our power through. And the main plan was done in 2007. It gets an annual update online. It's not a comprehensive plan that includes things like demand-side management, energy efficiency, and renewables. We are working on pieces that will get us towards that goal. For example, you've heard us talk about the model that we've recently got in PowerWorks that will help us optimize our resources and figure out how to scale in renewables and all of our resources, regardless of fuel. So we're working on those pieces. We're not quite sure when we're going to have all those pieces in place, but we do have an integrated resource plan. You're right, other utilities are working on those plans, and SCAPA is actually working on putting together kind of a standard template or form for those plans for all the utilities, and that work is ongoing right now. So, I mean, I think we're headed that direction. We're just not quite sure of the timeline.
And I think to reemphasize something Steve said, and it's a point maybe I didn't do a very good job of making it, is our in-house talent, those aspects that we're working on with people that are in this room right here, those are what are going to be critical. This integrated resource plan is a very basic. It doesn't cover these kind of things as Steve mentioned. It's very basic. I mean, the more comprehensive integrated resource plan is something that's totally different. But our ability to put these pieces together that Steve was talking about, Mr. Peters in the back there, who I think will do a phenomenal job of doing that, especially addressing some of these particular issues specifically.
Okay, with that, let's move to, sorry.
But before you go to the
Ms.
public, I
Godinez.
did want to raise one possible modification to the second motion, and these motions were just the ones that Commissioner Dentler had prepared, but where it says under Clause 2 of that motion, which pertains to terminating participation in San Juan and IPP, I would suggest that the Commission consider allowing GWP to amend its involvement in those projects. So if it were to become a renewable power plant, for example, or natural gas, something other than coal, that because as it reads now, it says terminate its power sales contract. So we want to make sure we preserve that right to amend our participation if those were to become, for example, renewable projects or something that's not coal. Just a thought, and I wanted to raise that before you go to the public so that they could respond to that if desired.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll go to the public. In order to preserve enough time on the next part of this, which is to continue our dialogue up here, we do have several comment cards. I'm going to ask that those speaking, if you could limit your comments to 3 minutes, that would be helpful for us to continue our dialogue up here. And if we somehow miss something, I'll entertain follow-up comments from the public to give you an opportunity to point out things we may be missing. So first one, and I apologize if I don't pronounce the names correctly, is Fabiola Lau. Am I mispronouncing the name? Okay, thank you.
Here. Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Fabiola Lau. I'm a Sierra Club staff member here in the regional LA office, and I'm also a resident of Glendale. I'm glad to be back here again. Thank you, Commissioner Dentler, for putting these motions in place. I was here at the meeting in, I think it was April or March, where you put this on. So very thankful for that. And I would just like to urge you commissioners to vote yes on all of them. Yes, I know there's been some discussion going about the technicalities of coal, and I appreciate Commissioner Xiao mention of addressing the bigger picture, renewable sources. But as they're standing in, as they're written, I think that they're getting they're addressing what we requested, what the public requested a few months ago, and I'm just urging you to vote yes on those three motions.
Thank you. Next speaker, Robert Howe.
Good evening. Thanks for holding this special session. My name is Robert Haw.
Sorry about that.
I'm with the Citizens Climate Lobby. It's a national organization that's singularly focused on building the political will for a livable planet. Because without political will, we won't be leaving behind a livable planet. That's pretty clear. So I'm glad that Glendale is reevaluating their stake in coal. And just to clarify, maybe a misconception, carbon capture and sequestration is not cost effective, and it never will be, because of the energy requirements needed to capture carbon from the smokestack and to store it. We have free energy coming down from the sky and in the wind right now. That would be a stretch to believe that carbon capture and sequestration could be cost effective with regard to those sources. One way to build the political will, though, of City Council is, of course, with job creation. With your new smart grid, building up a local distributed energy infrastructure makes sense, and combined with energy efficiency upgrade programs will generate lots of new employment. 5 jobs are created for every $1 million in output from solar projects, and 7 jobs for every $1 million in retrofitting. I have those references if you'd like them. Programs like these can be paid for with the savings from coal divestment and by foregoing participation in new gas turbine generators at IPP. Emphasize what you have, local facilities like Grayson. Long-term contracts are important considerations for Glendale's power budget. So with a price on carbon coming, it's financially beneficial to consider all potential likely energy sources. For example, only 25 miles from here is a vast supply of round-the-clock clean energy, offshore wind. This will soon be economically within reach. So in your deliberations today, please look at the future scalability of Glendale's energy sources, their costs, and our climate. And I just have a specific recommendation I'd like to have for a rewording of Motion 3B to Clause 2, and that is we'd like to see GWP follow the lead of LADWP and divesting from the IPP project by 2025, not be more specific than just stating before 2027. And to have Glendale work with other municipal utilities to maximize renewables brought down the transmission line from Utah. Thank you.
Next speaker, Kent Minot.
Again, yes, I'm Kent Minot. I'm a retired teacher, English teacher, and I work with the Sierra Club and the Beyond Coal campaign. And thank you very much for bringing forth these resolutions and for opening the conversation about getting off coal. I appreciated especially the conversation you just had about making specific your agenda, and how do you do that with an IRP? Well, I hear the reservations about the IRP. In L.A., notice that L.A. set a goal politically first. The mayor just said, we're getting off coal, 2020. And then everybody screamed and said he was crazy and thought about it and argued about it. And then we didn't achieve that goal. But the goal that we did achieve was stimulated by having set the goal. So you might want to consider how you work with the city council in setting a goal and specific goals. What percentages of renewables, what percentages of sun, wind, or other renewables that you may have available. And notice also how LA achieved the shift and convinced its citizens and businesses that it was a good idea to do so. First of all, LA instituted a solar feed-in tariff to stimulate rooftop solar development. And that was a proposal put forth by the LA Business Council. So business people put that forward and initiated it. And the second thing was that the Department of Water and Power doubled its energy efficiency budget. And energy efficiency is the quickest and cheapest way to make up the difference in the coal energy that you're planning to not use. So consider finding your own community's best way of implementing those ideas. Both measures create jobs, stimulate the local economy, and, well, help the citizens of Glendale have a little money in their pockets. Anyway, thank you so much for opening this discussion.
Can we ask a question of speakers, or would you mind?
No, not at all.
Thank you. Without taking too much time, but you're the second speaker who's referred to job creation. And one thing I'm not understanding, and maybe you can help me, is the coal generating power plants all exist outside of our state, and we're not contemplating building one here in Glendale.
Yeah.
So we have Grayson
That's
and
true.
a few other things. But so how would how do we get 7 more jobs in Glendale?
Well, who's going to put the insulation in your attic? Someone has to stuff that stuff up there, put the weather stripping around your doors and windows, install double glazed windows, plant a shade tree facing the southern and western side of your house, paint your roof white. These are all simple, cheap things that could be done. Now, an energy efficiency budget through a utility, like what they did in L.A., they sponsored what they call the Utility Pre-Craft Training Program, which was done through the Utilities Union, and they needed to bring in new workers to work with the senior journeyman people who have the skills, so to maintain the skill base, because you don't want beginners working with your electricity. So anyway, the first thing those workers did in the training program was learn how to do efficiency upgrades on houses, and they targeted low-income housing first. And it was smart because, well, you're helping the most vulnerable members of the community, but also low-income housing is the least efficient housing. People of higher income levels usually already have some double-glazed windows and have done some energy efficiency upgrades. But the lower-income housing, they can really use it. It helps poor people. It helps create jobs. It does mean there's a little increase in the utilities budget, so ratepayers do pay for that. But what they pay for is jobs locally right here in town. Now, what they're paying for now with coal, you're sending millions of dollars of your public's money out of state, and those people aren't going to spend it in shops and businesses around here. So that's the point about job creation, if that answers your question.
Thanks.
Next speaker, Tom Brady.
Hello, I'm Tom Brady. I live in Lockport Center, and I recently retired as the recycling coordinator for the city of Glendale. And many of our efforts in public works to reduce waste or connected to our compliance with California's carbon emission reduction plans, and we always made it a point to try to educate the public on how waste reduction helps prevent global warming. It is my understanding from the previous meeting that I was attended on this subject that the city can be pretty proud of your department's efforts to reduce reliance on coal-fired electricity that heavily contributes to global warming. The main problem is that these efforts are not very well publicized, and a lot of the people at the last presentation echoed that belief. So I believe that the adoption and publicizing of the 3 proposed motions on moving away from coal will do much to solve this problem. Glendale citizens are aware of the growing problems of a shrinking Sierra snowpack, which we rely upon for a lot of our water, rising sea levels, ocean acidification, increasingly unstable weather, Hurricane Sandy and everything. They need to know what the city is doing to address these problems. And particularly, if you could use an article in the newsletter that highlights the motions, explains your reasons for your actions, that and will greatly contribute to a greater public understanding of Glendale's positive role in addressing it's really the most significant global challenge that the world has ever faced, man-made climate change. And then specifically on motion 3B3, we strongly support your efforts to fully comply with California's environmental performance standard as set forth in Senate Bill 1368, and to not sign or renew contracts for ownership of coal-fired power plants. So the publicity in particular is, I think, very needed in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Aura Vasquez.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Aura Vasquez. I'm the representative for the Beyond Coal campaign here in Southern California. And it's really exciting to see you're taking on really your reliance, the city reliance on coal. Maybe, as stated, is not as bold as maybe the steps that, for instance, LA took or the mayor took back in 2009 when he declared that we were not going to rely on coal anymore. But I feel that the steps that you guys are taking with these motions are very honorable, and not just for what you're doing for the city, but what you're doing for the planet. I would like to recommend that, in order to protect customers' packets, the local economy and the environment, you also take the steps to really look at these motions and make them a little stronger, put in maybe more deadlines, and also including a renewable portfolio standard that really defines how your energy portfolio is going to really look like. Because with these motions, what you're doing is setting up the land for basically what's going to be the future for the electricity here in Glendale. I definitely, the Sierra Club, applaud the steps that you're taking, and we're here before you to offer our help and our expertise in the same way that we help Los Angeles and the Department of Water and Power and the City Council. And Commissioner Yao, I was excited to see your comment, and I think the word that you were aiming for was fossil fuels. And my understanding is that with your comment, you really wish to see a protection in these recommendations or motions that don't only talk about coal, but other possible fossil fuels that you might be relying to in the future, like definitely other sources. So we're really excited to see this. This is just the first step. Don't get discouraged, and we're here to help. And we're hoping that definitely this happens in the shortest time, not just so that you can bring businesses back to your community, but also that you can protect the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Steve Colton.
Thank you for having these meetings, especially this one and this topic. I want to speak not only in support of the motions, all of them, but also my articulate people, citizens who spoke before me. I'm a 32-year resident of Glendale, so I've seen the improvement in the whole environmental situation in Southern California. I was born in Burbank and raised in that area where the smog was literally choking every morning. We've come a long ways. We can keep going, and I think targeting coal is a good idea. People are talking about clean coal. When you talk about clean coal, you're talking about the burning process. There's also the mining process, and that is a dirty process. So we've shipped our dirt to somebody else, and we're paying them to take care of our dirt. Don't make the dirt. We've got the sun. Let's support solar and wind, as has been spoken of before. I'm very frustrated. I'm thwarted in moving forward with solar on my house because the city doesn't support it. I have to re-roof my house. It's a 1927 vintage house. It needs insulation. I don't get support. Give me the support. I'll do it. Thank you very much for hearing me.
What kind of support would you like?
LA and other cities give support for programs to get your solar going. They're either financial or they're rate lowering. Just help us out.
Just a comment, we have those programs through our public benefit charge as well.
Yeah, and there were waiting lists I couldn't get on.
That's correct. There is extensive waiting lists, but we have those programs. The funding is limited to the amount of money that we have in the budget, and we expend a pretty good amount of that. I can tell you I sign these things about 2 or 3 times a week, but we do offer that, but it is on a first-come, first-served basis as long as the money exists.
How long's the waiting list?
Well, I don't know. Steve, do you know offhand?
I think 3 years ago, and I still can't go.
I didn't think it was that long, but I'll double-check and take a look. Because as I said, we are still processing those today for new programs. So sometimes it may be also the home and there's other issues involved other than just the subsidy for the PV.
So I'd like to come back to the motions, open it back up to my fellow commissioners, especially those who perhaps haven't said anything, to see if there's anything you want to say either about all three motions or if there's a specific one you want to comment on.
Just one suggestion. I think we can talk about this for a very long time. I think we should at least have some sort of an understanding of maybe go one by one. Just take a look at the first motion, discuss it, make, either approve it, not approve it, amend it, whatever. But discussing all three and just coming back to it is just going to be this circular, reasoning that's not going to get us anywhere. So if we want to just take one at a time, then we can discuss it, have our opinions about it, and then move from there.
Is there one, maybe the president can help us figure out if there's consensus on any given one so that we can...
Yeah, I mean, I know I can say I do have some comments on the first one, some suggestions for it.
I do also, on the first one.
So if there are, what about the second one? Do we have consensus on that one? That's specifically talking about getting off of the two contracts within a certain time frame, one by 2017 and one by 2027, which is, I assume, Mr. Zern, this is when these contracts expire. So we are under contractual obligations up until those periods of time.
So we do have
Right.
opportunity to do it before.
So the honor before only seems to pertain to San Juan. The IPP says before. So it would give you the options, obviously.
Yeah.
And what, since I'm the maker of the motion, I can amend it to include what the attorney suggested would be. You want to give us that once more? I didn't write it down. I'm sorry.
So the proposal would be the motion would say that the GWP Commission recommends to the City Council that the City of Glendale make all good faith efforts to, 1, terminate its participation in the San Juan Power Plant on or before December 31st, 2017, and 2, to terminate its power sales contract with the Intermountain Power Project before the contract expires in 2027. And I would add, unless such contracts are amended to replace coal-fired generation with natural gas generation or renewable generation.
But I would go maybe back up. Instead of designating what type of fossil fuel that could be used, we can say as long as they meet the state's emission standards with power importing to California, rather than specifying that they would potentially turn to gas power or renewable energy. Could we just not talk about that, but talk about emissions specifically?
You could say, unless such contracts are amended to replace coal-fired generation with, or not even coal-fired generation, I guess, unless such contracts are amended to use a generation technology that meets the state's emission performance standard requirement. That could include coal if it, in fact, met the EPS.
Good. Highly unlikely, but it could.
Yeah, it's unlikely. I mean, it's probably not cost effective, but at least it leaves the option so that potentially there is a clean technology out there that could be. I know that people are saying it's not cost effective or that's still being developed, but potentially, if it does potentially come about and being in the market, we don't want to exclude ourselves as a city from purchasing lower cost power.
I have a slightly different version of this sort of question, which I think is revolving around the concept of preserving options. Can you just clarify, Mr. Zern, that if we come off of these contracts, right, let's say City Council agrees to this plan, and we come off of these contracts in this time frame, that we've got other types of baseload generation resources that would fill or meet that need?
We would have to.
Obviously, we would have to, but are you confident that we could meet those needs without, with an acceptable level of impact to the utility,
Yes.
financially and otherwise?
Based on some of the planning that we're doing right now, and there is obviously the IPP project is looking at a repower. So there's still the opportunity for us to remain in IPP under the repower, which would be to, at this point in time, the talk is natural gas with some renewable. So there's an opportunity for us to replace that with the natural gas-fired generation out of that IPP project. So
I just wanted to make a distinction here. You know, we kind of use this terminology interchangeably about renewable replacing coal or renewable replacing this. We have to draw the distinction that renewables are an intermittent resource, and you need a certain amount of base load resource that does meet the needs of the energy needs at times when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. And right now, the only way to kind of bridge a gap is through potentially energy storage technologies, which aren't there yet, in order to shift the time of use of when that energy is available. So I just want to draw that distinction, because I think oftentimes the terminology is thrown back and forth as if all these things are interchangeable, and each source has its own challenges when you're trying to meet the overall portfolio needs on a 24-hour basis.
I'm sorry. We are looking at several options.
I would also like to add that potentially waste to energy is also considered somewhat of a base load energy, because we're not getting rid of waste.
The biogas.
Anytime soon. I would also really like to just adopt the second motion. I think there is some wording there that says, City Council, to the City Council, that the City of Glendale makes all good faith efforts. I think that's vague enough that all the concerns that we have that we talked about, can be covered within that. Obviously, if it doesn't make any financial sense, then, the City Council will attempt to make all good faith effort to get this done. But if we're in a situation where we have zero contingency fund, then it makes no sense to break contracts or get out of things that make no sense for the city. So instead of amending this thing, I think there's already vagueness built in within this motion. I think we can just, adopt this and move on to the next ones.
Any other comments on motion 2?
I just would ask a procedural question of the president, which is if we are going to be amending the motion along the lines that Mr. Yao has suggested and the attorney's given us some language for, then I would be interested to hear what at least the Sierra Club thinks about that amendment, because that makes the motion something different from what the Brown Act, posting was that our motion was going to be. And I don't feel familiar enough with the meaning of this amendment to be prepared to vote on this amended motion. And I would prefer to hear at least one speaker, if there are any speakers who want to comment about that amendment.
Well, I'd like to first go back to Commissioner Yao. Maybe he can explain a little bit further, start from there.
About what my suggested amendment would be?
Yeah, what your intent is.
Well, as council was suggesting that I didn't want to have to designate any specific fuel source as an alternative, but rather to speak to the emission standards so that we can have the option to acquire future power based on any fuel sources that meets or exceed our emission standards, and that is cost effective.
But since this motion is specific to these two particular projects or plants, you're talking about really
specifically IPP, so that if IPP actually can retrofit the existing plant for power generation that is
not coal.
Could be coal, but if it does meet or exceed our emission standard, and coal right now it wouldn't meet it.
Right.
So if it does, technology becomes available where it does meet it, then of course coal would be a factor. But right now, we would say that as long as it meets the emission standards, then it's acceptable. Mm-hmm. IPP.
The contract is having a contract is acceptable.
With IP, if they convert their plant into an acceptable emissions standards for the power.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to entertain that amendment, procedurally, since I'm the maker of the motion, don't I have to accept the amendment?
Well,
or reject it?
Well, you made that motion at a previous meeting, and my understanding was we'd bring it back for discussion. So I would think we need someone to move and then someone to second whatever the motion may be. So.
But this is a significant amendment. So I mean, what's the first step in? So Commissioner Yao say he proposes this amendment to my motion.
I think the first step is for someone to make a motion.
Yes.
This is potential language for it. You could take Mr. Yao's language, incorporate it, and it becomes the motion, and then someone has to second it.
Right, so we don't have a motion pending. We prepared these motions and we brought
I
these
see.
to today's
All
agenda.
right. So I will make the motion as it originally was placed before us.
Okay, then at that point, I'm asking to see if anyone is seconding the motion as is written.
I'll second it.
Okay, so it's seconded.
Yeah. I'll second it because I think there's already built-in language that takes care of the issue Mr. Yao is talking about. I think it's
Okay.
already vague enough.
So that's a second to the current language. Now, Mr. Yao, if you wanted to propose that it be amended, you
Well,
could.
let's take a vote on that pending motion.
Because we have a motion and a second.
Well, but when you have a second, then you can have further discussion about it, right?
You can.
So rather than us going to a full vote, I'd like to see if there's accommodation or not. If not, we go to a vote.
But I would still like to hear if anyone else out there would like to speak if we're going to have such an amendment discussion.
Sure.
Let's go ahead, let's
So-
vote on the motion, and then if you don't have anybody if you don't have a quorum voting on it, then someone else can propose a different motion. But
Commissioner Yao, you don't think the language in there already takes care of what you're asking about?
I don't think so, because City Council will make good faith efforts, but if we suggest and they adopt this motion, they'll be able to terminate IIP regardless of any type of retrofits that IIP makes.
And they won't do that if the language is there?
Well, because
I mean, if they're going to really,
because this particular motion is not saying the words coal.
Right.
I think that's where
Talking about those two
Right,
contracts.
it's talking about terminating sales contracts with two specific producers. And I think what Commissioner Yao is getting at is, the reason behind the termination is the coal. That's where this idea came from. But he's saying, what if IPP changes and becomes a natural gas plant? Right now, the way it's written is that if City Council had agreed to this, that we're terminating our contract with them, current contract. So,
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Steve Lenz again, Chief Assistant General Manager. On IPP specifically, the contract now allows for a repower offer and amendments. So you could end up with, all renewables at IPP and the contract not terminated. So it is important that the language read that it could be amended to, the language along the lines that Ms. Godin has mentioned, because you don't want to terminate it regardless of what they're doing with it, because if they put all solar there, then you've terminated the agreement and you can't get the solar. So terminating it, the track that it's on now is an amendment to the existing power sales contract to replace what's there with something that has lower emissions. That could be gas, that could be some renewables, it could be, as Mr. Yao said, any number of things. But it is not necessarily a termination of the agreement. And so I think it's important that we at least make that amendment. On San Juan, as we're heading right now, it would be a termination for us. But along those same lines, we're in negotiations and we're trying to settle a case with EPA. You could end up with an amended agreement that has lower emissions and no coal. So I just think, and it's a legal technicality here, but I don't think the goal is to terminate necessarily. The goal is to reduce the emissions.
Yeah.
So I think as written, there's an issue with the motion, and we do need to at least amend it to have some language that recognizes that it could be an amendment as opposed to a termination of those agreements.
Or, Steve, could you also just specifically say coal-fired generation instead of the emissions? You could just segregate it as termination of coal-fired generation, or does that tie your hands?
We could. We would just have to come up with some language. And this gets back, I guess, to the Commissioner's comment about, someday do you have coal-fired technology that's cheap enough and low emissions enough? As several folks have said today, that's not the case, but that's your call.
I take your recommendation. I just think there's so much ambiguity and so much can happen in the next, 14 years. If scenarios change, don't we think the Commission or the Council will then come back to this issue and, I don't know. You want to set a precedent or whatnot, but I just think, people a few years from now or 5 years from now will be as smart or smarter than us to realize, listen, you know what, now it's all renewable energy. Let's not terminate this. I think, these type of decisions don't get just
Basic
because
business decisions.
Just because it's written, 10 years before and the situation has changed doesn't mean that you have to go by that.
That's true, but I think the important fact, and Steve mentioned it, is we're negotiating these agreements right now. We're in negotiations on these now, so we'd hate to do something that could potentially tie
Well,
our
I think
hands.
that's why the point I was going to make is that while it may seem like it's 10 years out, you do planning that far in advance for these things. And so if we're going to do something here, let's make it meaningful so that it actually sets a direction. Obviously, council has to agree before they'll do anything. I mean, it's really council's ultimate decision here. But we want to provide our best guidance to council as a commission that's, labored over this discussion, because they probably won't spend as much time as we will here. So I think the issue comes back down to this motion treats it as pure contracts. It doesn't really say, it doesn't really get to the intent of why it is that all of a sudden we're trying to get off these contracts. It doesn't mention the fact that, these things, these producers could change their plants, and all of a sudden that IPP could become a very good contract based on environmental goals that we might have as a utility and as a community. This isn't law, this is a motion. At the end of the day, City Council has to take that, but I'd rather serve up to City Council the best possible language and not just toss an idea up and then have them labor over the language. I'd like to give it the best effort on our side about, hey, almost adoption ready motion, if it's at all possible for us to get on the same page as a commission.
I propose we just go ahead and come up with the language.
Okay, well,
just modify this.
procedurally, there's
Yeah.
a motion pending, so
Okay, so
again,
I would be happy to amend my own motion to include the new language proposed by council, trying to word Commissioner Yao's concerns, but I would like to hear from the public because it's a different motion than the one that they already came and spoke on. So I'd like at least one designated person, if we could. I mean, that's 3 more minutes of public input before we. Looks like we might have emerging consensus on that amended language.
Who is it that you're proposing?
So that the amended language would read everything.
No, I'm saying who from the public are you proposing?
If let them self-select, if we could hear just, my hope is we could get one person.
It hasn't been amended yet right now. That's the issue.
Right. Well, I'm proposing, as the maker of the original motion, I'm proposing to retract that motion and instead propose. No, we've moved and seconded.
Vote on it. You have a motion and you have a second.
Okay.
So go ahead and take a vote.
I can retract my second if that'll be easier. I can retract my second if that'll be easier.
I guess that's fine.
I'm okay with. I mean,
since I.
So what would a new motion sound like?
Okay, you want to hear? Okay,
Yeah.
it's the one that council sketched out for us. And it would read exactly the same as 3B2 reads currently, except there would be a comma after the year 2027, so that the last clause, starting with little I in parens, would read, to terminate its power sales contract with the Intermountain Power Project before the contract expires in 2027, comma, unless such contract is amended to use a generation method which meets the state's emission standards.
But I think we'd want it for both San Juan and
Okay. Well, that's fine.
Make it plural.
We can take care of that. I mean,
that's-
and just to reveal I agree with Commissioner
That's
Jamie, and I
the-
think it's silly to have to do this so many years in advance. But if this will get us consensus and get us moving,
So
then
that's the spirit of the intent behind what
Maybe-
we're trying to achieve. Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. It's okay. We think that's a good idea to amend it like that. What has happened in LA is they're keeping a contractual relationship going with IPP, and the pressure, because Utah is a coal producing state. So there are a lot of excuse me, utilities up there that want to keep on producing coal, but they also want the money coming from LA. So LA said, listen, we got to get off coal. State law, blah, blah, blah. They explained it. So they said, okay, we want to keep on being your customer, but that means the utility gets completely off coal. Now, from an environmental point of view, that's a big victory. That means guaranteed no more coal coming from that plant. They've got to rebuild the plant. That's the deal LA is making. Now, if you revise your motion this way, that means you say you want to be in on the deal too. And you want to continue to be a customer of IPP and get the new greener energy that'll be coming down those wires. The concern for us is that no wording be put in there that vitiates your commitment to get off coal. Remember, you cannot mine coal in an environmentally sustainable way. Coal mining is a disaster. You cannot transport coal from the mine to the power plant in a way that is healthy for the public. Communities near those rail lines suffer spiking rates of asthma, heart attack, all kinds of diseases. Now, you still can't burn it in an environmentally sustainable way either. And even if you, in the future, there some magic thing would happen where coal-fired sequestration would be financially feasible, you'd still be left with the coal ash, an extremely toxic byproduct that's causing environmental problems all over the country. We had a huge issue with it right near where my family lives in Tennessee. In Harriman, a coal ash berm broke, destroyed homes and farms. Those farms will never produce now because of the toxicity that's been put in there. Anyway, all I would say is just keep the commitment to getting off coal. That's the real, and I think that's the thing that the citizens of Glendale will applaud you for. I think what you're saying is, here's the news, folks, we're getting off coal. And that's really the point. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well put.
Okay, so do we want to second that? Can you read it again, and then we will we'll put it for a second?
Commissioner Dentler, please correct me if I don't have what you had. That the GWP Commission recommends to the City Council that the City of Glendale make all good faith efforts to, 1, terminate its participation in the San Juan Power Plant on or before December 31st, 2017, and 2, to terminate its power sales contract with the Intermountain Power Project before the contract expires in 2027, unless such contracts are amended to use a generation technology that meets the California emissions performance standard.
Okay. Do I have a second on that motion? You okay with that, Commissioner Denton?
Yes, I am, but don't we need to retract the second?
I already did.
You did? Okay, I didn't know.
Do
Okay.
I have a second to
Fine.
this motion?
I'll second.
Okay. Commissioner Chan seconded. She beat Commissioner Jamian. Okay.
As long as it's before 2027.
I'm going to put that motion to a vote. All those, can we go ahead, let's do a roll call vote.
Commissioner Jemian?
Aye.
President Armenian?
Aye.
Commissioner Dentler?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Okay, one down. Let's move on to the third motion, which we haven't discussed so far.
Mr. Lentz is running out to renegotiate the contract.
Yeah. The third motion.
This is a live event, so that's very probable.
Yeah. So the third motion, just to put it on the record, that the GWP Commission recommends to the City Council that the City of Glendale continue to comply fully with California's environmental performance standard as set forth in Senate Bill 1368 as interpreted by the California Energy Commission, and accordingly that the City of Glendale not sign new or renew existing contracts for ownership of coal-fired power plants or leases for the output of coal-fired power plants.
I'm going to propose one change, which is to change environmental to emissions, and that's because that's what the law reads.
California emission
Performance
standard.
So before I make this motion, are there any other proposed amendments so that we can save time by not going through what we just went through before?
No, I think it's very consistent with the previous motion, whereas we need to make some adjustments so that we don't bind the city to not having the options to sign contracts that meet the emission standards, even if it means clean coal. Because right now, as it states, that the city of Glendale not sign new or existing contracts for ownership of coal power plants. So we're at a point saying no coal power at all in the future. Is that? I mean, I know that's your intent, Commissioner Dentler, but do we want to go that way?
This is, I propose, I'm going to make this motion as written because in the spirit of what Mr. Ajamian reminded us, in the event a technology emerges that doesn't exist today and that no one anticipates will exist in the foreseeable future, let's just get this done today, and a future commission, a future city council can come back and make a new motion pertaining to a new technology. But I think it's very important that we send this message, and it's very important that this is probably the most politically important message. I think this is going to be the simplest message for City Council to understand and to articulate to the community. And now is now, and then is then, and we can, our successors here on the Commission can deal with future emerging technologies another day.
Okay, so what I heard is that you've made the motion.
Yes.
As is. Okay,
I made a motion and a speech in behalf of my
all together,
motion.
wrapped into one beautiful package. Okay, do we have a second on the motion part of what Commissioner Dentler said?
I will second the motion as it exists, including Ms. Glenez's
Correction,
change of emission.
which is
Correction.
California Emission Performance Standard. Okay. Then I will, I'm going to put this to a vote. Can we do a vote?
Commissioner Jimian?
Yes.
President Armenian?
Yes.
Commissioner Dentler?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
I'm going to abstain in this one. I like clean energy policy, but I'm not sure about limiting our options.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Okay, so motion 3 passes. Okay, so we'll come back to motion 1, which is the integrated resource plan that Mr. Lenz is just dying to go do.
I know you have some comments and
Yes, go
suggestions.
ahead.
My suggestion is that we put a date on this, adopt an integrated resource plan by a certain time. Without that, it really doesn't say when we're going to aim to finish this. So a realistic date from Mr. Zern and staff? A year? Okay. That's fine with me.
Just one question. I just want to clarify. Did I hear you say that creating an IRP will cost somewhere about
It's possible. It has a potential, but we'll look at all our different options. If we were to hire somebody from the outside to come in and do it for us, it would be very costly.
Okay.
But we'll review our different
very
options and
costly?
see.
That number was a few hundred
Oh,
thousand?
it can be. Oh, yeah, several hundred thousand.
Okay.
But we'll take a look at it and see. As I said, we have extremely talented staff in GWP, so we will put their talents to good use and see if we can do a lot of this in-house. So we will
Quick
develop.
question about the politics of that is, do you have any concern that since say we passed all 3 of these as a bundle, 3 motions go to City Council, which is fairly unusual for us to send multiple motions from one meeting over to City Council, and then they'll sit and take a look at them, and you'll be there that night advising them. There'll be a staff report, et cetera. I'd hate to have one of the 3 motions be a reason to tank all 3. If there's only one that has a price tag and City Council looks over and asks you the same question and you say hundreds of thousands of dollars, I'd hate to jeopardize the others.
Well, I think based on what we've discussed here today, we have a better feel for what the IRP actually is. I mean, just coming off of some of the discussion at our last meeting, it was more along the lines of things that other cities have done, and I know those have been more elaborate, comprehensive, and very expensive. But I think we can find a way to get this done in a very comprehensive manner and done in a quality manner, and
in a year?
for quite a bit less. You bet. You said Mr. Lenz is chomping at the bit to do this. Look at him. He's ready to go. He'll have this
He
thing
was out of
done.
the room when you said that.
My comment on this, I think the second and the third motion already capture the essence of this of these three motions. I mean, just mandating that we do an IRP, if that's within the plan, it's great. But, I would rather that money be spent on helping the community put up solar instead of spending a few $100,000 on a specific document that is, for which the purpose is already being done anyway. I mean, I think in motion 2 and 3, we're already outlining where we want the city to go. This is just like that extra, really, long step. And in these economic times, I don't know, if you think it can be done in an efficient way, great. Otherwise, I can go either way on this.
And I think, Commissioner Jemian, that, and Ms. Dentler did a good job of clarifying, there was no, our feet weren't to the fire on this to get it done tomorrow. And I think there's enough room in here for us to be able to get something that is a quality report that hits the mark on what we want to see it hit, and we can do it for a reasonable amount.
Well, that kind of leads into where my thoughts are on this, which is I feel like we should be doing a integrated resource planning as part of our regular business, but in a comprehensive way, not just focused on a immediate objective of, hey, we want to get off coal, and so let's go do an integrated resource plan. It ought to be part of our ongoing resource planning, in my opinion, that looks at the issues having to do with all generation sources. Every generation source has its own unique set of issues that come along with it. And so doing some sort of IRP process in the, both long-term and short-term planning process, whether you're looking 5-10 years down the line or you're looking in the next year, would help, I think, chart a course for the utility that takes into account all these different issues on every different type of source that make up our pie of resources that we're tapping into to meet the needs of the community. In this particular instance, I think the way this came about in the context of, the coal issue specifically. But I'd like to see, if we're going to go down this road of a, IRP, that it start with the global question, right, that looks at the whole pie, and then it could be, for example, that as part of, and the IRP that's looking at, let's say, the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever that time frame may be that you would define, that you would say, okay, in that time frame, we're coming up, here are 5 recommendations. One of those recommendations is that, we're going to get off coal. Another recommendation could be to replace the coal generation. Here's what we're going to do from a resource planning perspective that would, meet the needs. If you're going to take this many megawatts of coal-generated assets offline, you're going to replace it with this many of whatever those sources are. Again, balancing intermittent resources with base load 24/7 type of resources. Maybe it's flexible generation. I mean, there's a lot of changes coming in the coming 5 to 10 years with our state's generation portfolio that are going to really change this dynamic of how we meet the needs and maintain reliability. The coal piece is just one piece of this pretty complicated course we're on that we have to navigate through. And as a small utility, I think the good side is we're nimble, we're small. The bad side is we're small and we don't have the big resources, so we have to be very mindful of the community's costs to the community and the investments and that sort of thing, which is what I think staff's responsibility is. So, I mean, if we're going to move forward with this motion, I do worry about motion fatigue on the city council level, but beyond that political issue, I really would like to see this start from the global. You could still say the coal things. I'm not objecting to the coal language, but I just think it ought to say something that establishes specific goals for our, to set a clean energy goals, right, for the utility, and then one of those specific things in the short term is the coal stuff.
That's exactly right.
Then it gives you that flexibility, right?
Absolutely, and that's the exact way I read it. That's why I said 12 months to do this. I could do the coal in a month.
Right.
The 12 months was the bigger picture, and I think the way I read it was that that establishes specific goals and timetables. I guess I read it more as a general IRP that included an aspect.
Yeah, and I just want to get specific about it.
That's great.
And that way, you're defining the IRP as the general, right? It's a clean energy. It's goals that get you toward cleaner energy portfolio, right? And then one of the things that you're saying in here is to say also get us off coal.
That's one aspect, as you said.
Because if you're going to do an IRP, I think it needs to have legs to it that are long-term in nature, that are, look at everything that the utility is doing, in my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion, but that's kind of the way I would view an IRP.
Yeah, and I think that's the way you interpreted it.
That was my intent, and that's the way I interpreted it.
Yeah.
That's why I threw those big dollar figures. If we were to bring somebody in, that wouldn't be just to do coal.
Right.
That's to do a comprehensive plan. But that's the way I interpreted it and what I intended to do, and why I said 12 months, because I intended to do a larger.
But when you're in front of council and they turn and ask you, do you have the budget to do that? Your answer.
It all depends on how I present it. We've as I said, we've talked our way through this. From what initially, there had been things thrown out. Last time I remember the city of Pasadena was thrown out as an example. Well, that was a very large undertaking that they did. So if I was going to compare it to that, then yeah, that's something that we don't have in our budget. But as we've talked through it and gotten a better idea of where we're going, I think we can do a lot of this with our own staff, and trust me, Ms. Dentler, I'll present it.
Well, okay.
Because I think it's
not a matter of trust. It's not a matter of trust. It's not personal, Mr. Zern. It's not a matter. I know, but we're this is a very political series of motions that we've made. We don't usually do this. We do not usually send a whole package of motions to council, and I think I really want to proceed cautiously with things that have big dollars attached to them. So it's great to see you're excited, and Mr. Lenz is going to work 24/7 on this. But my eye is on the taxpayers.
Baseload staff.
Taxpayers expect us to proceed with caution when there are dollar figures. So I'm going to withdraw my motion and suggest a amended motion if I can. Is that procedurally proper?
It's fine. As I said before, there's no motion pending on it.
Right. So I'm going to propose a new motion with new language, and let's just see if this flies. If it doesn't, we could go back to, if there's lots of if majority votes for the existing motion, I can certainly propose the existing motion, but I'm not sure I want to now. So I'm thinking of this, that we move that the GWP Commission directs staff, i.e. not a recommendation to City Council, but we are. We can recommend to
the
staff?
City Council,
and to the city
not
manager
to staff.
or City Council.
All right. We can't recommend that staff do something? We can only recommend that City Council direct staff?
City manager and City Council.
Make recommendations on policy to city manager and city staff.
Council.
To council. You can't specifically in the.
Okay, can we make a recommendation to city manager?
Can.
Sure.
And not mention City Council?
Can.
All right. Thank you. Then I would propose that the GWP Commission recommends to City Manager that the City of Glendale develop and adopt, then jump to the word specific goals and timetables for, and all the rest of the language remains the same. So that, in essence, we're not going to City Council with a recommendation that entails any specific date and doesn't require City Council to turn to Mr. Zern and ask how much something's going to cost. We are recommending to City Manager, we're a City Manager form of government here, and he'll make budget recommendations in the future budget cycle if he sees fit, but that we are recommending that City Manager have the staff develop and adopt specific written goals and timetables for the elimination of the municipal utilities reliance on coal-fired generation, et cetera, et cetera. And the last clause is important to me. the last clause is important to me, and we're losing sight of it in our debate, which is the community came before us, and I did my own homework on this, and that we'd like to see future planning take place that takes into consideration ways that will not shift the impacts of coal-fired generation onto other communities. And I think that's going to take some thought and staffing, and I think it's maybe premature to send this to City Council as a budget-related item.
What I'm also hearing, though, Commissioner Dentler, is that you're getting rid of the whole concept of the integrated resource plan.
For now.
Okay.
I think we can come back to another for that another day. What do you think, Mr. Zern?
Well, Mr.
Liberating you now.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, to be honest with you, I'll pursue an integrated resource plan for my department, because I think it's critical for many of the reasons that Mr. Armenian mentioned. So, I mean, I'll be doing that. Whether you want to include that in here or not, I still want to pursue that. That will likely be what will supplant the strategic plan that we had. Somehow this IRP and the strategic plan will come together.
Right, that's fine.
But I still want to pursue that.
Then it comes from staff. So then it comes from the city manager and staff, because you as a manager feel that this is important. But when you're sitting down to design your goals and timetables, you will do them with reference to what the Commission indicated are some of our current priorities.
But can I just ask one question? Maybe I'm missing something here. Haven't you already set the timetables with the other two motions?
Yes.
For coal-fired generations?
Mm-hmm.
It almost makes this one mute, but that's just my opinion. I'm just pointing that out. I think especially your second motion puts the timetables. That's the only coal we have. That's the only coal-fired generation that we're involved in, and you've got the timetables on that, plus the additional language about being able to maintain contracts if they meet the emissions standards. So I'm just pointing that out. That's the way I'm interpreting it. It seems a little redundant. I think you've got it covered, but that's just me.
I agree. And the third motion says we won't sign any new ones. So we're going to get off the two that we have, and we won't get into a new one.
That doesn't meet the emission standard.
Right.
Correct.
But, so, I mean, why the same?
The first one is primarily
again.
talking about the integrated resource plan.
Really?
Yeah.
But that's been taken out, so if you take that
so
out.
that's taken out. You're right. Then it's moot. Yeah.
It's really...
And also, I assume that last reference to such plan would come out as well, right?
Yes, that's
Say
a good
something
point.
like
Yeah.
goals.
Yeah. So do we have consensus more for the first motion that what is in our packet, or now what's the new emerging consensus?
Well, I can just speak for myself in that if we're going to go with the original motion, I'd want it to refer to the IRP as one that looks at all clean energy planning, right?
Yes.
And that the goal thing is just part of that. If you're going to go down the path of just taking out the IRP idea and just going toward specifically the coal issue, I feel like it is repeating
I
things
understand.
other than I think one aspect of it, which is I think part of your spirit of what you were saying, which is this blatantly saying the shifting of impact to other communities. But I think our actions are speaking louder than the words, in the sense that if we stop doing something, then we are stopping having that impact on other communities. So that's
Mr. President, do you have a
a
view about the recommendation to city manager versus sending this motion to council?
I do like that idea more, but I would still stick with my original kind of idea that if we're going to make a recommendation, even if it's the city manager, I would go global and keep the IRP in there.
That's acceptable.
Because I don't think repeating ourselves with a motion on the coal, gets us really anything. We already spoke about that with the other two. I think we're very clear with our intent. So if we're going to add value, I think, to the city manager,
understand completely.
As a commission, it would be to say something that I have no doubt Mr. Zern's going to do it, because any prudent utility is going to do that sort of planning. They're not going to sit on their hands, waiting for the world to define where we're going. A prudent utility is going to do that sort of resource planning. But it doesn't hurt to say that in the context of clean energy, which that does qualitatively say something to staff, which says when you're doing that planning, don't just look at how you're going to meet the needs, but look at how you're going to do them within the context of a cleaner way of meeting those needs.
So do you want to try to propose language? Integrated resource
Well,
plan.
before I do that, I took a lot of time speaking about where I stand. Are there others that have a particular point of view?
I agree with that clean energy policy concept. Having an integrated resource plan does speak to that. But again, we're going back to the elimination part of this motion where it says elimination of municipal utilities reliance on coal-fired generation. So that goes back to motion 2 and 3, whereas if we include that word elimination, doesn't that negate number 2 and 3? Because 2 and 3 were saying about emission standards. So that if we include that sentence in there, that means that we're not considering coal fire, even clean coal, if that becomes feasible in the future. So is that what we're saying here too?
I think President Armin is saying don't even talk about coal, just talk about general IRP, which then...
I thought Mr. Lynn said we already do that when it comes to clean energy, or just renewables, he said.
He said renewables, which I think
Sorry.
clean energy I look at as a broader than just renewables.
Which would meet your purpose as well, right?
Right, so if we don't talk about elimination of anything specific, then we mentioned that we're here for clean energy and we want to make sure that emission standards will meet or exceed our state standards, then we're good with
I mean, the other way to look at this is, Mr. Zern already stated clearly that whether we say anything here with a motion or not, he's going to do an IRP. The only nuance I think here, which I think he heard loud and clear from us, is that we'd like to be a clean energy IRP, not just a generic IRP. I mean, the other approach is to just let GWP staff do their planning. The other two, in other words, don't go forward with this motion. The other two motions make clear where our position is vis-a-vis coal, and leave it at that. That's another approach.
And Mr. Armenian, to add on to that, I can come back to you with an outline of the IRP that we plan to pursue. So you'll see that ahead of time and where we're going to hit the key areas.
And so we would have an
and
opportunity
could comment on that and say, we think you should put some more emphasis on this, or you missed that, or so that we've got all of those variables in there, including coal and renewables and all of those. I can do that easily.
Perfect. Better. What are the thoughts on that?
That sounds good.
Particularly
They would not
Commissioner
make
Devlin.
additional motion.
I mean, I haven't made a motion, so I think I have made a motion, haven't I?
No, we haven't.
No, you
No,
haven't.
I don't think I have, so we don't need me to make a motion, so.
So if you're okay with that,
Yeah.
then I think we move forward with that approach.
We'll revisit this
We'll have
subject
an
another
opportunity to
time.
revisit this when Mr. Zern is committed to come back with a plan on what an IRP would look like, and we can help shape that with our comments.
Right.
And then we can have more opportunity for public comment as we figure out what we want to do with that. And I would like to see staff then let the president know, when you're ready for that to come on the agenda, so that then we have a set time that the public knows that we'll be discussing the whole topic of an IRP.
Yeah, I'll need to get together with my staff because I just dropped that bomb on them tonight, and they've heard it for the first time. So
That's why he ran out.
So I'll have a chance to talk to them, and then we'll put it on the agenda forecast.
Okay. Then we move, we're running out of time, so I want to move forward with the agenda. Next agenda item, please.
3C, GWP Commission Elections, President and Secretary.
Okay, I know there was a little bit of chatter before as we were getting started with our meeting regarding this. So normally we would, we're already later than normal on the election of the next president and secretary. However, one of the reasons we had delayed it is we were waiting for appointments to get firmed up, given some of the uncertainties on council, which have cleared up over the last couple months, but I don't know that the appointment process has played out yet. So several commissioners do not know their status in terms of moving forward. So option one is we move forward as is, and we make our selection. We may have to come back and make another selection. Or option B is to defer this item for one more month and see if the appointment process for commissioners gets clarified. Is there any input on that?
Yeah, the way I don't think it's going to be resolved within a month or two, because it could drag on for this council to make appointments or reappointments. So that's my feeling, that's not going to be quick.
So are you saying let's go ahead and
I think we should just
do an
go
election?
proceed as usual. I mean, I want to do it last month or before, because let the process play out and let the reappointment. If there's new commissioners, then of course we'll consider those if they are officers and reappoint them.
Mm-hmm. Others who have a thought on this?
either way. Ms. Cardenas, do you think it'll take a few months, a couple of weeks? Has there been any talk at all within the council?
I'll let Mr. Zane address
There
that.
had been some discussion. See, I wasn't at council on Tuesday. It would have been a week ago when there was a brief discussion. The city manager indicated he was coming back in June with a report to discuss the broader topic of commissions, and I assumed that the issue would be taken up in its totality at that time. So June was the
But some nominations are already trickling in, which
Yeah.
is what the normal process is. Every city council post-election, you usually get a few trickling in. They don't
Correct.
look at it all at once unless there's some other comprehensive review happening right now.
Yeah, and I don't know all the details. That's just a comment that I heard, but it was scheduled to be discussed next month. So June was the time frame I had heard.
Is it nominations or appointments?
No, what happens is a council member
Right,
nominates.
They nominate, and everybody else does.
And a week later, it gets on the agenda, and then a week from that point, they will vote on that particular nomination. So it just every council session over the next several months, as Mr. Yao was mentioning, depending on which it could be all kind of mixed bag of different commissions. City council members make their decision. Again, this is for those seats that turned over, not for the seats that are continuing in their term. So really, in this instance, we're talking about Council Member Najarian and Council Member Friedman specifically. I'm not so clear about the situation where Mr. Quintero got appointed to a seat that was vacated prematurely outside of the election process.
He may or may not choose to appoint someone new or to reappoint.
So he has options
He
to
has
go either way.
options, yeah, so.
Okay, so really the appointments of 3 council members are at issue here. So 3 of the 5 of us are at issue, I think, in terms of.
4, actually.
It's 4.
Oh, right.
4.
Right.
Yeah.
It's 4.
Yeah, because there's one that was,
So-
yeah, so 4 out of 5.
Well, granted, if there's 4 out of 5 unknowns here, I think the smart thing to do is just to push it out. I don't know. But again, it doesn't matter to me either way.
Okay. Other?
Well, when do you want to push it out? Let's say our next meeting is June 3rd, right? 3rd. So do we wait then, and then we push out again into July? And then if there's no movement, do we push out into August? Because I think typically, we have elections around January, February. So if you want to, you're doing a great job, Mr. President.
I'm not taking
I was just going to ask.
I'm not
what's
taking
gonna-
it. I'm not looking at it as a coup d'état. Don't worry about that.
For that exact same matter, though, unless the current president is completely out of hand, which he hasn't been, I don't think. I don't know. I just think 4 out of 5 unknowns is good enough reason to push it out, whether it's June 3rd or July, whatever.
I just want to throw out one thing in the interest of disclosure. I'll be out of town June 3rd, so you can all go ahead and have elections without me, but, it would be nice to be here. And so if we say we're pushing it to June 3rd, I want to make it clear I won't be here June 3rd. And also, I just think our president's doing a great job, and to have some continuity while we wait and see how it all shakes out, unless the president would really like to cycle out of his position. I think he's doing a great job, and we should just keep him in place until we see who the commissioners are.
I'm happy to go either direction. I really don't have. I'm not bothered by
And Ms.
either
Godinez,
direction.
we can put this on the agenda each week, and the commission can choose to push it out or make a decision or have an election that meeting, right?
We would just have to have it on the agenda. Since it's on today's agenda, I would suggest that if you do want to continue it, that you move to continue it to a date certain, so whether it's June or July or whatever you choose.
We didn't have any speakers on this, did we?
No.
May I ask a clarification as well? Can we agendize that motion so that we change the terms of the president? Let's say instead of a 1-year reorganization term, can we make it a 2-year term, for example? There's nothing in the ordinance that says that the president of the commission has only to serve 1 year. What is there?
No, I don't think so. Give me 1 second. Let me quickly check that.
Because if we're bound by a 1-year term, then we need to make certain decisions.
No, there's nothing in there that limits or
Term.
provides for any term for the president of the commission.
There's nothing in there that says when we should hold elections either, right?
No.
Is our July meeting July 1st? Monday?
Yes, I believe July 2nd, so Tuesday, yes, July 1st.
Okay. So
So do I have is there a motion?
I would propose to push it out to July 2nd since Commissioner Dettler won't be here on June 3rd. And since probably by that time, the council wouldn't have made much forward movement on this. And since the city manager will make a presentation about the commission structure again in June, there's a lot changing. Like I said, for those reasons, I would like to push out to
July 1st.
Yeah.
Well, should we add an amendment where we have a drop dead election so that I know there's a lot of things going on. You get the fiscal and the budgets going swerving around June, and July might be a non-starter for appointments, so potentially it could go into August. So do you want to make a June or July as a stop election instead of going on, moving to future meetings each time? So that, I mean, a friendly amendment would be just make it the next meeting as the drop dead date.
Well, I mean, you're setting the deadline is that you're going to consider at that meeting. If for some reason there isn't consensus, there can be consensus or there could be consensus to continue it. I think it's really up to the commission. I think you can't legislate forcing a decision other than us making the decision. Right.
Right. You have to continue it to a date certain, so it can't just be from now on until we decide to vote on this. So.
Yeah. So I think the next, if we agree on this motion, then the next time it'll be considered will be the July meeting. At that time, again, there will be a similar discussion to this. We can make that decision, or if the commission
So
decides.
have you made a motion?
I think I did.
Yeah, and I'll second it. So now let's just vote.
Okay. Let's go ahead and put it to a vote.
What was the motion? To move it to next.
We move to continue it to July 1st.
July 1st.
Commissioner Jimian?
Yes.
President Armenian?
Yes.
Commissioner Dender?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes.
Commissioner Chan?
Yes.
Okay. Next agenda item.
4A, discuss the schedule for electric revenue enhancement program.
Here she comes. Tartuni.
Mr. President, members of Commission, hello, my name is Atine Hartunian. I'm the Public Benefits Coordinator for Golden Water and Power. I'm here to talk to you about our proposed electric rate outreach plan and share with you our schedule for this outreach plan. Listed below are our means of communication that we're going to be utilizing in order to reach our customers to inform them about the proposed electric rate increase. We're going to be utilizing our advisory committee, our community meetings, making special presentations to certain groups, having coffees in the park to engage our customers, utilizing social media, starting off our campaign with a direct mail letter, which I will go through the schedule in a few brief moments, utilizing our website, our newsletters and the city's newsletter, as well as advertisements through our flyers, GTV6, and bill messaging. We have also established an advisory committee that is comprised of 10 stakeholders that represent low-income, residential, small business, and large business customers. Their purpose is to discuss the rate structure with them and outreach, campaign, and messaging. We've already had our first meeting, which was last week, and we have 2 more meetings coming up with our advisory committee. I have distributed the advisory committee list to you. There's 10 members on the meeting list currently, and like I said, we have 2 more meetings coming up with them, which we will be discussing our outreach efforts and our messaging points for the campaign.
Can I ask a quick question about that?
Sure.
Sorry. Just looking at the advisory committee membership. So I agree with all of the listed stakeholders on the previous screen. That was a good list. So then I was, yeah, there we go. The 10 stakeholders representing low-income residential, small business, large commercial. Just pointing out, so you have 3 representatives of the educational community, so the college, and then 2 from the Glendale Unified. They're not in any of those, and I was just, my question is, so that's just a comment, is that, that's kind of heavy for just out of 11 members, 3 are from large educational sectors. But not a criticism. I just wanted to point that out. You don't even need to respond. But what's an AP supervisor on number 11?
Payable supervisor.
Accounts payable.
She's actually filling in because the controller cannot make the rest of the meeting. So it's actually 10 people. So one.
And just a note, last year on our advisory committee meeting, we did not get participation from the educational community. So this year it was a sort of feast and famine. So we had both the college, which let me also point out, when you look at that stakeholder list, you're talking about large commercial users, small business and large commercial users. These are significant users of electricity. They also have become big PV solar users as well. So they're substantial customers in our overall scope. But it's just interesting. Last year we didn't get any participation, and this year we've got from both the college and the school district.
I have a related question in the same category. So I did notice on the list that you provided that with the different segments of our community, we do have a couple representatives from a couple of organizations within the Armenian American community. What about some of the other parts of the community, like the Filipino community, the Korean community, Latino community? Have we made efforts to find suitable candidates, or is just that there's no interest within those communities?
Well, the advisory committee was actually chosen by the city manager's group, city manager's office. However, we will utilize this committee to reach out to all the different populations in Glendale, and whether it's through the certain types of organizations or special presentations. This was just the advisory committee in order to kind of coach us through the messaging process and the outreach. But then when it comes to the actual outreach, yes, we will be doing significant amount of outreach to each different type of group in the community.
Mm-hmm. But is there not a way to get some representatives from those parts of the community to be part of the advisory committee?
Well, I will tell you,
just to be inclusive.
We invited a
everyone.
lot more people than are on that list.
Sure.
Those are the folks that were willing to participate. So we reach out.
I guess that was my question. Have you invited and there hasn't been a response, or?
I don't know that we've gotten specifically into some of those groups that you've mentioned. We've covered them, I think, in some respects with our community law, the legal representative that's there. We also do on our advertisements, we reach out to all of the various newspapers that are in Tagalog and Korean, Armenian, right. Spanish. And then when we get into some of these, as Atine said in our stakeholder meetings, they'll point out to us who we need to target. So I don't know that we reached out, Atine, to representatives from all of the different ethnic groups.
Not to all different.
But we did reach out to a lot of folks, and this is to the group that was willing to help us.
Mm-hmm. I guess then take it at whatever face value. I mean, I would encourage you to actually invite a few people from, at least a representative from each of those parts of the community, just to be rounded out and be inclusive. I know you're going to do, I have no doubt you're going to do the outreach effort part of this to those groups, but I think it would be really good to, again, since you have the Armenian representation, I think it's really important that you have representation from those other communities as well. At least make an attempt. I know how hard it is to get the interest sometimes, but at least you can say you tried.
Yeah, we have, Hispanic Business and Professional Organization. We have about 6 women's organizations, 1 women business. I mean, I could rattle them off and I won't, but I do agree that I'm sure that you put together a bigger list, and these were the people that responded. I know how that goes, and I know it's hard to get people to come forward, but you want to make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot right out of the gate. The list is going to be subject to careful scrutiny and criticism, and I just really want to make sure that you get as broad a...
We always expect to take some level of criticism, but as
Sure.
I think Atine indicated, this is the advisory committee. This is a very rough, initial group.
Yeah,
when we get out and do our actual direct outreach, it's an effort that's well-rounded. We get out to various segments of the community. We get into, as Tina indicated.
Yeah, but this is the list that's going to get, published in the letters to the editor, and it will. The list becomes the list, and it gets sort of frozen in time, so it should be as broad as possible.
We do the best we can, so we can't force people to participate. So
no, I just want to make sure that
yes.
an invitation went out. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Moving on to the next slide, we have organized 6 community meetings in different parts of Glendale to address the proposed electric rate outreach. And we also have provided a link at the bottom in which we will be promoting this link, and it's a direct access to Google Maps. We could show you how it works, where customers can go in and they could look at the different maps and location information for all the meetings that are coming up. While that's loading, I'll go to the next slide. We've also organized a series of coffees in the park, which we will be adding more to as we progress. And these are going to be informal discussions on the proposed rate increase. There's going to be no presentations. Basically, we're going to have customer service staff available at these locations to assist customers and showing them how the rate calculator works and what the impact is on their bills. And you can see on the screen, this is the Google Map link that I was talking about. It basically informs customers of all the different meetings and times and locations of our community meetings that are coming up. So it's very interactive. In terms of special presentations, the executive team has been asked to make certain special presentations to the following groups. If you can go to the one more. Thank you. And in this group also, we are reaching out to several of the other groups, such as the women's groups that you were mentioning, Commissioner Dentler, and some of the other ones to see if they'd be interested in us coming and presenting to them. And then also we will be presenting to the Commission in July and City Council presentations either end of July or early August. This is the outreach schedule. We propose on starting on the week of May 27th, launching our webpage on our rates. This is where we point all of our customers to the website under the rates tab, where they can find all up-to-date information on upcoming meetings, the rate calculator, our rates, and they can also have the opportunity to post questions on our frequently asked questions page. They can email us the questions, and then we'll post our response and the question on the page. Those are for customers that maybe can't attend a meeting or just want to ask a few more questions after the fact. We'll be issuing a press release on the rate structure and the community meetings. First of all, we'll also be sending out a direct mail to every single customer in Glendale, separate from their bill. It'll just be a letter letting them know about the proposed electric rate increase as well as the community meetings. Flyers will be available at all public counters. They'll be translated into different languages, and they'll also be available online. And we'll be working with our community-based organizations to distribute the flyers and post them on their community boards and in their newsletters. June 1st, we'll be placing advertisements in local newspapers and online prior to all community meetings, and that'll be consistent as community meetings come up. June 3rd, we'll be sending out our From the Source newsletter, and as well as the City Connections newsletter, mentioning the community meetings and our website and any type of information that would assist our customers in learning more about the proposed rate increase. And from June 5th to July 17th is basically our entire outreach schedule. Well, that includes community meetings, special presentations, and then our ongoing work with our advisory group to distribute flyers and rate information. And if customers would like to learn more about the proposed rate increase, first of all, we'd guide them to our website, as mentioned, and clicking on the rates tab. Oh, it's not there yet. That page will be up by the end of the week, and asking them to look for the letters in their mailboxes the week of May 28th. Following us on Facebook and Twitter, because we will be having posts up on our Twitter feed as well as Facebook. Signing up for our newsletter if you haven't already done so, and join us at any community meeting or coffees in the park. And if you can't make it, to post a question to our frequently asked questions page. Will be, like I mentioned, we'll be answering it and posting the question. And you can always call customer service if you can't access the rate calculator. Then our customer service staff will help you.
So I have a question probably for Mr. Zern on this. Can you refresh our memory? What's your timing in terms of this process of the considering this the rates issue?
Mr. Armenian,
beyond this,
members of the Commission, we will kick in earnest our community outreach, and our goal is to be back to you with probably a special meeting, because I'm anticipating it'll probably be mid-July. A special meeting dedicated strictly to the rates, and we'll go through our discussion and get your recommendation to council, and within 2 weeks we will be back to council to present the same to them and to give them your recommendation.
Sometime by end of summer.
Yep. Yeah, sooner I would hope. We could push GWP Commission to the end of July. I'm hoping to try to keep it as tight as possible, so we can get the decision by at least late summer, early fall.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Hartunian. I think this is really good. I think clearly it represents quite a bit of learning and process improvement from the last experience we went through on this. So I appreciate the efforts. Any other commissioners?
It's our meeting, just to add, as Atine was indicating, some of this is still a work in progress. So once we get the full package of the outreach materials, we'll get those all to you, because I imagine it'll be in between meetings. So we'll send that to you via email. And then on our June 3rd meeting, we'll come back and give you an update, because our first community outreach meeting will be Wednesday of that week, Atine? Mm-hmm. So we'll be able on that Monday to give you a final sort of update on our outreach efforts and make sure that you've got all the information. And we'll probably by then be able to show you all of the handout materials.
That'd be great. Other commissioners with questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next agenda item.
5, oral communications.
Okay, I don't have any further cards, so let's move on to the next one.
6, agenda forecast.
Yeah, it was stapled to the motions at the very end, at least in my packet. Over there. So one question I had, which I know I spoke with you individually, Mr. Zern, is regarding the budget issue.
Yes.
I think you're still in the process of bringing forth to council and actually still working on it. So my question is that something we ought to replace other things and on the June 3rd and talk about?
Yes. My goal was to have that as pretty much the item. We'll have the update on our outreach efforts, but the rest of the meeting would be dedicated towards a presentation on our budget, including our capital program and our dashboard on our general M&O as well.
Okay, so you foresee the June 3rd would be the right timing, and potentially the entire meeting would be on the budget?
That's what I had wanted to do.
Okay.
If you want to try to squeeze a few more things in there, we could, but I thought we'd dedicate the time to the budget and your ability to discuss and make any comments that you have.
Okay, well, let's hold that thought for a second. Let's look at all the things that are on June 3rd right now in the agenda forecast, and then we can make that decision. Some of them are repeating agenda items that we do periodically. There's one, I guess the first one, which is the response to grand jury. What is that one? I know that's having to do with the grand jury on the transfer issue, right?
Right, and that needs to go to the city council first. It's going to be going sometime in June, but I don't know the date yet.
But not by June 3rd?
Not by June 3rd. I'd propose moving it to August.
Okay. So let's do that. And then I think all of these other things are just, again, repeating agenda items.
Could I, since I will be out of town on June 3rd, would it be acceptable to move legislative update? Or I see it also pops up again in September, but I hate to miss that.
So the issue is, I guess, if we go with Mr. Zern's recommendation, all these items would bump.
Oh, I see.
July.
We'd bump them all to July.
I see it.
Because
I see it.
budget would take over. But then, I mean, we won't be able to do all those things in July. If we want to just defer it for now, given the time of night it is right now, we can just say bump all those things to July 1st for now. And then at the next meeting, when we do agenda forecast, we'll take a fresh look at which ones to keep and which ones to bump to August, which currently only has one item on it.
Yes.
That work?
That works. And looking at July, a couple of those items I would recommend right now, we'd have to bump them to August because we're just not ready. So I think it'll all work out.
Okay. Is everyone comfortable with that? Just to make a quick decision? Okay. So the June 3rd agenda item will only be one thing, which is review of the budget.
And an update on our community outreach efforts.
Right.
And remember to put elections in for July.
That'll be July.
Yes. Elections, as well as your new policy on agendizing stuff.
That comes
which
back
you can probably you could probably cover quickly in June.
Yeah, let's do that in June. Let's
I think we'll have plenty of time.
Okay, so we'll do budget, we'll do the agendizing issue, right? And the update on the community outreach. That'll be the June agenda. And then everything else on that shows for June 3rd will move to July 1st with one more addition, which will be the election of officers.
Wasn't also in July we decided to have an update on the fee and tariff? Because it's supposed to be in effect July 1st.
Adopt it by.
Yeah, because my intention initially, I think, was maybe to have a preview in June and then maybe make suggestion recommendations before you bring it to council. But it doesn't sound like it's going to be.
I think your mic is off.
Sorry. Presentation on the
Okay, it sounds like it's going to be after the fact as information, but well, maybe in the future we can have some feedback.
Take my word for it, it's pretty straightforward, and we're really, really confined by what our financial and outside legal counsel tell us. There isn't a lot of wiggle room.
The statute pretty carefully defines what that rate will be and what you can consider in that rate, so there's not a lot of room to say, we think it should be this instead. So, but we can certainly present what's in that rate and what it involves.
A quick question about the July, what we're calling, we've conflated these two topics, utility bill redesign / revenue enhancement. And when you look at the proposed electric rate outreach plan, it says that the city council presentation about the electrical rate increase would be end of July or early August. So trying to back out to when we would talk about it, according to the outreach plan, it says GWP Commission will have a presentation from staff in July at our July meeting. So
be mid-July is my goal. It'll be a special meeting, no doubt.
Oh, okay. My mind must be wandering.
That's my goal.
Special meeting.
It may push as far as the end of July, but my goal is to get it back to you at a special meeting where we talk about nothing but the rate in mid-July.
So my question was going to be, if the community wanted to know the time that they could come and talk to the commission about the rate increase proposal,
I think
it will be at a special meeting.
It'll be at a special meeting,
And
we'll be able to announce it probably at the July meeting. We'll be able to say we're going to have a special meeting.
Even though our agenda forecast for today says
Correct.
bill redesign / revenue enhancement.
Yeah, and both of those need to be
Yeah.
We will revisit
Okay,
those in
great.
June.
So let's try to clarify that in June, even though I will be gone, but you'll clarify it.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Okay. If there are no other agenda items, then ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.